The dim hum of Alex's old communication device broke the silence of his tiny ship. It was unexpected, almost impossible. The device hadn't picked up a signal in years, and yet here it was, flashing, blinking, and chirping as if alive again. Alex leaned over the console, his brow furrowed in curiosity. The signal was faint but persistent, a rhythmic pattern that almost sounded like a plea. He adjusted the dials, trying to clear the static, and listened closely. It wasn't in any language he understood, but something about it felt familiar. A chill ran down his spine. Coordinates, he muttered to himself as a string of numbers appeared on the screen. The signal wasn't just random noise. It was pointing him somewhere. The location was far off, on the edge of known space, near a star system most have forgotten. It was a risky journey, especially for someone like Alex, who had neither the best ship nor the best luck. But his curiosity burned brighter than his fear. He had to know who, or what, was sending the signal. As he set the course, his mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a distress beacon from a stranded explorer, or perhaps an automated message from an ancient outpost? Either way, the mystery tugged at him like a gravity well, pulling him toward the unknown. The journey was long and uneventful. The stars outside the window blurred into streaks of light as his ship zipped through hyperspace. Alex spent the time reading the old journal his grandfather had left him. It was filled with sketches of alien artifacts and notes about mysterious civilizations. His grandfather always spoke of the universe as a place full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Alex wondered if this signal might lead to one of them. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, Alex found himself staring at a small, desolate planet. Its surface was rocky and lifeless, dotted with craters and covered in dust. There was no sign of life, no welcoming beacon, just the faint signal that had guided him here. "Doesn't look like much," Alex said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. He piloted the ship toward the coordinates, his heart pounding as the barren landscape came into view. Then he saw it, a massive structure half buried in the ground, like a forgotten relic of a time long gone. The building's architecture was strange, with sharp angles and glowing lines that pulsed faintly, as if the place itself was alive. As Alex landed his ship and stepped out onto the dusty ground, the air around him felt heavy, almost electric. Each step he took toward the structure made his heart race faster. At the entrance, a soft blue glow greeted him. It wasn't intimidating, but it wasn't inviting either. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped inside, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The signal had brought him here, but why? And who, or what, was waiting for him inside? The interior of the structure was cold and silent, the air thick with an ancient stillness. Alex's footsteps echoed as he ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Strange symbols adorned the walls, glowing faintly, as if they were reacting to his presence. "This place feels alive," Alex murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The signal was stronger now, pulsing in a steady rhythm that guided him through the labyrinth of corridors. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to hum, like a quiet song playing just beyond his hearing. It wasn't just technology, it felt personal, as if someone was calling out to him. After what felt like an eternity, Alex reached a massive circular chamber. In the center stood a tall, cylindrical pod bathed in a soft blue light. It looked old, yet untouched by time. The surface of the pod shimmered, reflecting his flashlight in strange, shifting patterns. His heart pounded as he approached. Was this the source of the signal? Was someone, or something, inside? Alex hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console attached to the pod. The symbols on it were alien, yet his instincts told him what to do. He pressed a glowing button, and the hum in the room grew louder. The pod's light shifted to a warm golden hue, and a low hiss filled the air as it began to open. Alex stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. Inside the pod lay a figure, humanoid yet distinctly alien. She had pale, iridescent skin that shimmered like moonlight and long silver hair that flowed around her face. Her eyes remained closed, her expression peaceful, as if she were sleeping. She was beautiful in a way that made Alex's heart ache. Ethereal, otherworldly, yet strangely familiar. As the pod fully opened, her eyes fluttered open. They were a deep, glowing amber, filled with a mixture of confusion and relief. She looked directly at Alex, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a voice soft and trembling, she spoke. "I've been waiting for you for so long, human." Alex froze. The words were in perfect English, yet laced with an accent he couldn't place. Her voice was melodic, almost hypnotic, but her tone carried an overwhelming sadness. You've been waiting for me," Alex managed to say, his mind reeling. She nodded weakly, trying to sit up. Her movements were slow, as though she hadn't moved in centuries. Alex instinctively stepped forward to help her, his hand steadying her as she leaned against the edge of the pod. "I thought no one would come," she whispered, her amber eyes locking onto his. "But you came. You answered the call." Alex didn't know what to say. Who was she? Why had she waited for him? Before he could ask, her eyes began to flutter, and she slumped forward. He caught her just in time, her body light as a feather. As he held her, he realized two things. This woman wasn't human, and whatever had brought him here was bigger than he could have imagined. Alex carried the alien woman out of the chamber, her weight surprisingly light in his arms. Her breathing was faint but steady, and her skin felt cool, almost like polished stone. Questions swirled in his mind as he retraced his steps through the labyrinth. Who was she? How did she know him, or at least think she did? Reaching the entrance of the structure, Alex laid her gently on the ground. The dim sunlight from the planet's distant star painted her features in soft gold. Her iridescent skin shimmered faintly, as if absorbing the light. "Come on, wake up," Alex muttered, lightly tapping her cheek. He didn't know much about alien biology, but she seemed fragile, almost like she had been frozen in time. After a few tense moments, her eyes fluttered open again. This time, they focused on Alex with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. She tried to sit up, but he stopped her gently. "Easy," he said. "You're weak. Just rest." She hesitated, then nodded, leaning back. Her amber eyes studied him intently, as though she was trying to memorize every detail of his face. "You are not the same," she said softly, her voice still weak but clear. "But your presence, it feels familiar." Alex frowned. "What do you mean? Have we met before?" She shook her head slowly. "Not you, but your kind. Long ago, your people came to my world. They made a promise." "A promise?" Alex asked, his curiosity growing. "What kind of promise?" Her gaze dropped, and her expression darkened. "To return. To help us when the time came. But they never did. I waited. Alone, for so long." Her words struck a chord deep within Alex. He thought of his grandfather's old journals, filled with tales of strange ruins and mysterious encounters. Could it be connected? "Why me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Why was I the one who got the signal?" "You carry their legacy," she said, her eyes meeting his again. "I can feel it in you. You're connected to them, to the ones who came before." Alex sat back, trying to process what she was saying. If her story was true, then humanity had been to this part of space before. But why hadn't he ever heard of it? And why would his grandfather, of all people, know about it? Before he could ask more questions, a faint rumble shook the ground beneath them. Alex's instincts kicked in, and he quickly scanned the horizon. In the distance, a black shape appeared in the sky, growing larger by the second. "Someone's coming," he said, his voice tense. "We need to get out of here." The alien woman nodded, her expression serious. Despite her frailty, she managed to stand with his help. As Alex helped her toward his ship, He couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was just the beginning of something much larger and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The rumble grew louder as Alex helped the alien woman onto his ship. The black shape in the sky had now taken the form of a sleek, menacing craft, its engines roaring like a predator closing in on its prey. "Who are they?" Alex asked, his voice edged with urgency as he strapped into the pilot's seat. The alien woman, seated beside him, gripped the armrest tightly. Her face was pale, and her voice trembled as she answered. "Scavengers. They hunt for ancient technology, artifacts, and beings like me." "Great," Alex muttered, flipping switches on the control panel. The ship's engines roared to life, but a warning light blinked furiously. Of course, now the thrusters decide to act up. The scavenger craft was almost upon them. A beam of light shot from its underbelly, scanning the ground where Alex's ship rested. He didn't need to be told twice. If they didn't take off now, they'd be sitting ducks. With a flick of a lever and a whispered plea to his aging ship, Alex managed to lift them off the ground. The ship shook violently as it climbed, the scavenger craft in pursuit. "Hold on," Alex shouted as the ship veered sharply to the right, dodging a barrage of laser fire. The alien woman gasped but said nothing, her amber eyes wide with fear and determination. "Do you know how to stop them?" Alex asked, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "They won't stop," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They believe I'm valuable. They'll destroy your ship just to claim me." "Fantastic," Alex muttered. "I always wanted to play hero in a space chase." The scavenger craft fired again, a blast grazing Alex's ship and sending it into a brief spin. Alarms blared, and sparks flew from the console. He fought the controls, gritting his teeth as he stabilized the ship. "Can you do anything?" he asked her, desperation creeping into his voice. She hesitated, then placed her hand on the console. Her fingers glowed faintly, and the lights inside the cockpit flickered. The ship shuddered, and suddenly, its speed increased dramatically. "What did you do?" Alex asked, his eyes widening. "Enhance the thrusters," she said, her voice strained. "It won't last long." The ship surged forward, the stars outside turning into streaks of light as they pushed beyond the scavenger craft's reach. Alex glanced at the radar and saw their pursuers falling behind. "Ha! Take that!" Alex shouted, relief flooding his voice. But the celebration was short-lived. The alien woman slumped in her seat, her glow fading. Alex quickly steadied the ship and turned to her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, shaking her shoulder gently. She opened her eyes weakly. "I'll be fine. Just need to rest. Using energy like that takes a toll." Alex nodded, concern etched across his face. "We're not out of this yet, but at least we've got some breathing room." As the scavenger craft disappeared from view, Alex realized that this was more than just a chance encounter. Whatever the alien woman carried, her knowledge, her abilities, was worth risking everything. The ship sailed through the vastness of space, the stars stretching in long lines as Alex set a course toward the nearest safe planet. The alien woman sat quietly beside him, her eyes closed as she rested, trying to recover from the energy she had used to help them escape the scavengers. Alex glanced at her occasionally, his curiosity growing with each passing minute. Who was she? Why had she been waiting for him? And why had her people once promised to return? She stirred beside him, her amber eyes slowly opening. She looked at him with a soft, almost apologetic gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. I shouldn't have drained my energy like that." "No need to apologize. You saved us," Alex replied, his voice warm. "But you're still weak. You should rest more." She shook her head gently, though, and met his eyes. "I've been waiting for so long. Resting has never been an option." Alex didn't fully understand. How could someone be waiting for so long, alone, in a place so distant? But before he could ask more questions, she spoke again, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "You need to understand something," she said, her gaze distant. "My people, we were not alone in this part of the galaxy. Long ago, we made a pact with humans, with your ancestors. We believed your people could help us when the time came." Alex's eyebrows furrowed. "A pact with humans," he repeated. "I've never heard anything about it." She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting something deeper, something older. "Your kind came to us, explorers from another time, with knowledge we could never have dreamed of. They promised to return when we needed help, but as the years went on, the promise was forgotten." Alex leaned back in his seat, digesting her words. His grandfather's journals, filled with stories of lost civilizations and alien encounters, flashed in his mind. Could this be what his grandfather had been studying all along? Had there been some kind of connection between the past and now? "So you've been waiting for humans to come back?" Alex asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "But why me?" She looked at him, her eyes soft but intense. "You are connected to them. I can feel it within you. Your blood, your soul, it's tied to those who came before. There's a bond, even if you don't understand it yet." Alex felt a strange warmth wash over him at her words, like something deep within was stirring, something he couldn't explain. His connection to this mysterious woman, to this strange history, began to make a little more sense, even though it still felt like a puzzle with too many pieces missing. "Why now?" Alex asked, his voice quiet. "Why is the time for help? Now?" She hesitated, and Alex could see the pain in her eyes. "There are forces at work in this galaxy, forces that would see my people wiped out, forgotten. I need your help to stop them. We have a chance now, but only if we act quickly." Alex's mind raced. He had never imagined his life would lead him to something like this, a battle for the survival of an alien race. But he couldn't ignore the pull he felt, the sense that this was his calling. There was something bigger here, something far beyond himself. "I'll help you," Alex said, his voice firm. "But you need to tell me everything. I need to understand what's really going on." The alien woman nodded slowly, her gaze softening with gratitude. "In time, you will," she whispered. "In time, you'll understand why you were the one who answered the call." The journey to the nearby planet was quiet, too quiet. Alex kept his focus on the controls, his fingers moving automatically as the ship hummed through the dark expanse of space. The alien woman, Syria, rested beside him, her condition slowly improving. She hadn't said much since their last conversation, but Alex could see that she was preparing for something important. The stars outside the window blurred as they entered the planet's atmosphere. The ship shook slightly, the heat of entry causing the hull to groan under pressure. Alex steered the ship down toward a secluded area far from the bustling cities. He had to find a place where they could figure out their next move without being interrupted by scavengers, or worse. When they finally landed, the ship's engines powered down with a soft whine. Syria stirred and slowly opened her eyes, blinking as if adjusting to the world outside. "We're here," Alex said, turning to look at her. "We can rest for now, but we'll need a plan." Syria nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "It won't be long before they find us. They never stop hunting, not when they sense an opportunity." Alex didn't need any more encouragement. He got up and began to scan the surroundings. The area was quiet, an open stretch of rocky land with sparse vegetation. It looked peaceful, but Alex knew better. Nothing about this journey had been peaceful. As he moved to check the ship's systems, a faint buzzing sound echoed through the still air. Alex froze, his hand hovering over the tools. The sound grew louder, and the ground beneath them trembled slightly. "Get inside the ship," Alex shouted, rushing back to Syria. Before she could react, a shadow fell across them, and the unmistakable shape of the scavenger ship appeared in the sky, heading straight for them. It was even larger than before, its dark hull gleaming ominously as it hovered overhead. "We don't have much time," Syria said, her voice tight with urgency. She stood up, the last of her strength returning as she steadied herself. Alex rushed back to the ship, slamming his hand down on the controls. "I'm not going down without a fight." The scavenger ship descended, its landing gears clanging against the rocky surface. The doors slid open, revealing a group of armored figures, their eyes hidden behind dark visors. Alex knew they meant business, and he wasn't about to let them take Syria without a fight. Syria stepped beside Alex, her expression hardening. "We don't have a choice. They will stop at nothing to capture me." "I know," Alex said, his voice steady. "But we're not giving up without a fight." The scavengers advanced, their weapons ready. Alex quickly scanned the ship for anything useful, anything that could give them an edge. His eyes landed on a small, forgotten weapon tucked away in the corner of the cockpit. A plasma rifle, old but functional. He grabbed it and handed it to Syria. "You know how to use this." Syria took the weapon without hesitation. "I've had to defend myself before. Let's make sure we don't go down easy." The scavengers were getting closer now, their footsteps heavy on the ground. Alex's pulse raced, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his grip on his own weapon. He had no idea how they would get out of this, but one thing was clear. He was ready to fight for Syria, and for whatever future lay ahead. The first shot rang out, followed by another, and Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The fight for their survival had begun. The air was thick with tension as Alex and Syria stood side by side, weapons drawn, facing the advancing scavengers. The first shot had been fired. Echoing through the rocky landscape, it narrowly missed the group of armored figures, sending a blast of dust into the air. Alex's heart raced, but he kept his focus. The scavengers weren't going to make this easy. "They'll keep coming," Syria said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We need to find a way to escape, or we'll be trapped here." Alex scanned the area. The scavenger ship was blocking their only easy exit, but there had to be another way. His eyes landed on a narrow ravine behind them, barely visible among the rocks. It was risky, but it could lead them to a safer area. "Over there," he pointed, his voice low. "That ravine. We can use it to get around them." Syria nodded without hesitation. They started moving quickly toward the ravine, keeping their distance from the scavengers. The scavenger leader, a tall figure with a scared face, barked an order, and several of his team broke off, heading straight for the ravine to cut them off. Alex's mind raced. They couldn't let the scavengers catch up. He needed a plan, and fast. "Syria," he said, lowering his voice, "we have to hold them off just long enough to get to that ravine. Do you think you can?" "I know," she interrupted, her amber eyes narrowing. "We can't let them catch us. I will do what I can." Syria took the lead, moving with surprising speed despite her earlier weakness. Alex followed, glancing over his shoulder at the scavengers gaining ground. He tightened his grip on his weapon. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. As they neared the ravine, Syria stopped abruptly. Alex almost ran into her. She raised her hand, signaling for him to wait. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something just beyond the noise of the approaching enemies. I feel it," she whispered. "They're coming. But there's something else. Something older. I've sensed it before." Alex blinked, confused. "What do you mean? What else is there?" "I was never alone here," she said, her voice trembling. "The people who came before. They left something behind. A warning." Before Alex could ask more, the scavengers rushed into view, their weapons raised. The leader yelled, "Stop right there." Alex aimed his weapon, ready to fire, but Syria stopped him, her hand on his arm. "Wait," she said. "I know what we need to do." Without warning, Syria stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly. She raised both arms, and a wave of energy rippled through the air, knocking the scavengers back. Alex stared in disbelief as they were sent tumbling, their weapons flying out of their hands. "What? How did you do that?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Syria lowered her arms, breathing heavily. "It's part of what my people left behind. A way to protect myself. And you." Alex's mind was spinning. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. She wasn't just an alien. She was something far more powerful. And the promise of her people, the one they'd made with humans long ago, was suddenly starting to make sense. "We need to go," Syria said, her voice urgent. "This place won't stay safe for long." They turned and sprinted for the ravine. But Alex knew that whatever lay ahead, this was just the beginning. The truth about Syria's people, the connection to humanity, and the forces hunting them, it was all beginning to unfold. And he was about to learn just how deep the mystery went. Alex and Syria reached the ravine just in time. They had barely dodged the last blast from the scavengers when they made their way down into the narrow rocky path. The walls of the ravine rose high on either side, cutting them off from the open land. For a brief moment, they thought they might have escaped, but the scavengers weren't far behind. Alex could hear their footsteps growing louder as they followed, shouting orders to each other. There was no way they could outrun them in this narrow pass. He looked around frantically, trying to find a way to slow them down. His eyes locked onto a large boulder halfway down the ravine. "Syria, we need to stop them. Do you have anything left?" Alex asked, his voice urgent. Syria, her energy already drained from her previous display of power, shook her head weakly. I can try, but it won't hold them off for long." Alex took a deep breath. There was no choice now. They had to fight. He grabbed a large rock and tossed it onto the path in front of the scavengers, hoping to buy them a little more time. "Go," Alex shouted, grabbing Syria's arm and pulling her deeper into the ravine. They moved quickly, but the scavengers were gaining. The leader, a tall man with a rough, scarred face, was right behind them, shouting for his team to push forward. Alex's heart raced as he heard the clatter of footsteps drawing closer. Then, a sudden crash echoed from the rear. Alex glanced back to see the leader stumble and fall, as if struck by something invisible. The scavengers behind him froze, confusion spreading across their faces. Syria stood still, her eyes glowing softly, her hand stretched out towards the scavengers. "I can hold them, for now," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "But we need to move." Alex nodded, and they rushed forward, deeper into the ravine. The path ahead narrowed even further, and they had no choice but to keep moving, pushing past jagged rocks and tight spaces. But the scavengers weren't done. They came charging, forcing their way through the narrow path. Just as one of the scavengers raised his weapon to fire, Syria stepped forward again, her eyes now blazing with energy. "Stay back," she commanded, and this time, her voice was stronger, more commanding. A shockwave of energy burst from her, sending the scavenger tumbling backward. The rest of the group hesitated, but the leader, now furious, raised his own weapon and fired a shot at her. Alex didn't think. He leaped in front of her just as the beam of light struck. The pain was sharp, searing through his chest, and he fell to the ground with a grunt. His vision blurred, but his hand instinctively reached for Syria's, pulling her close. "Alex," she cried, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. No, you can't." "I'm fine," Alex gasped, his voice strained. "We need to keep going. They won't stop." Syria looked at him, her eyes full of pain and determination. "You don't have to protect me anymore. I won't let them hurt you." Before Alex could respond, the leader of the scavengers took another step forward, raising his weapon once more. But Syria was ready. With a fierce cry, she summoned all the strength she had left, sending a pulse of energy so strong it shook the ground beneath them. The scavengers were thrown off balance, crashing to the ground as the energy wave pulsed through them. The leader fell, his weapon slipping from his hand. And just like that, the threat was over. Breathing heavily, Syria knelt beside Alex, her hands glowing with healing energy. "Please, don't leave me now." Alex smiled weakly, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I'm not going anywhere. We've made it this far, together." As the scavengers lay unconscious, the two of them stood in the quiet aftermath, the weight of what they had just survived settling over them. The worst was over, for now. But Alex knew one thing for sure. Whatever lay ahead, he and Syria would face it together. And the mysteries of her people and their promise to humanity were just beginning to unfold. The silence that followed the battle was almost suffocating. The scavengers lay unconscious in the ravine, scattered in strange positions, their weapons now lying useless in the dust. Alex could hear nothing but the sound of his own labored breathing and the faint rustling of wind through the narrow path. Syria was still kneeling beside him, her hands glowing faintly as she tried to stop the bleeding from his chest. The wound was deep, but it wasn't fatal, yet. The energy from her hands seemed to soothe the pain, but the healing wasn't fast enough. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice full of concern. But there was something in her eyes that told Alex she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Alex managed a weak smile, even though his body felt like it was drifting. "I've been through worse," he said, trying to lighten the mood. But his words felt hollow as the darkness on the edge of his vision grew stronger. Syria's face tightened in worry, and her hands moved more quickly, trying to speed up the healing process. But the longer she worked, the more drained she looked, her glowing energy flickering. It was clear she was using her own strength to help him, but Alex knew she was running out of power. "Stop," Alex said softly, reaching out to touch her hand. "You're not going to make it if you keep going like this." Syria shook her head, her amber eyes filled with determination. "I can't let you die. You're the one I've waited for. You have to be the one to help us." Alex struggled to sit up, his body protesting, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in her voice. "Syria, I can't do this without you. We've been through too much for me to just." His words were cut off by a sudden wave of dizziness. The pain in his chest flared up again, and he collapsed back onto the ground, the world spinning around him. Syria's hands hovered over him, shaking. She was clearly pushing herself to the limit, but it wasn't enough. There was a deep, unspoken understanding in her eyes as she looked at him, knowing that what was about to happen couldn't be avoided. "I've waited so long," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "But you are more important than I am." Alex's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. "Syria, no, you don't have to." But it was too late. With a final, concentrated effort, Syria placed both hands over his chest. A pulse of energy surged through him, so strong it felt like it was tearing him apart. At the same time, Alex felt a wave of warmth spread through him, and the pain began to fade. But Syria collapsed beside him, her strength fully spent. Her breathing was shallow, and the glow in her hands had dimmed to almost nothing. "Syria," Alex gasped, trying to push himself up, but his strength was still not fully restored. "I've given you everything I have left," Syria said weakly, her eyes fluttering. "Now it's up to you. You have to finish what we started." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes as he gently cradled her in his arms. "I don't know if I can. I don't know what to do." "You've always had it in you, Alex," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You just have to believe it." Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shallow. But even in her weakened state, there was a calmness about her, as though she had finally fulfilled her purpose. Alex felt the weight of the sacrifice she had made, her life force, her power, everything she had been. "I won't forget you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll finish this. I'll make sure your people are remembered." As the last of her strength left her, Syria's eyes closed for the final time, and Alex knew that everything had changed. The future of her people, and the promise between humans and aliens, rested now in his hands. He wasn't alone anymore, And he wasn't giving up. The fight had just begun. The ravine was quiet once again, the only sounds the soft rustling of the wind and the distant hum of the stars above. Alex sat there, holding Syria in his arms, the weight of her sacrifice pressing heavily on his chest. The energy from her final act had restored him, but it had drained her completely. Her once glowing skin was now pale, her breath barely a whisper. For a long moment, Alex didn't move. His mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions, a mixture of sorrow, determination, and confusion. He had just lost the most important person in his life, someone who had waited for centuries, someone who had trusted him to carry out a mission he barely understood. But now, that mission was all that mattered. "I won't let it be for nothing," Alex whispered, his voice thick with grief. "I'll make sure your people's story isn't forgotten." With great care, he stood up, cradling Syria's body in his arms. He couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened. The scavengers would eventually wake up, and he didn't know how much time he had left before they came searching for him again. But he had something now, something that could change everything. The data crystal that Syria had given him, the one filled with the knowledge of her people, was his only link to their lost civilization. The promise of the past, the bond between humans and aliens, was now in his hands. He had to learn what it meant, and he had to make sure it wasn't lost forever. Alex walked back toward the ship, his steps heavy but resolute. The journey ahead would be difficult. He knew that. But he couldn't turn back now. He had a purpose, and Syria's sacrifice would not be in vain. Once inside the ship, Alex carefully laid Syria's body on a soft surface, covering her with a blanket. He whispered one last goodbye before turning to the control panel, his fingers shaking slightly as he accessed the data crystal. The holographic images that appeared before him were alien, yet somehow familiar. They showed symbols, ancient cities, and glimpses of a long-lost civilization. There was so much to learn, so much to understand. For the next several hours, Alex pored over the information, his mind racing as he decoded the messages Syria had left behind. The knowledge was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. He learned of Syria's people's connection to humans, the ancient promise made, and the powerful forces that had sought to erase them from existence. As the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, Alex felt a wave of determination wash over him. He now understood what Syria had meant when she said it was up to him. The threat to her people was still out there, and he had to stop it, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, humans, and aliens who would stand together to protect what remained of the past. With a deep breath, Alex set the ship's course toward the nearest human colony. It was time to share what he had learned, to build the alliances necessary to fight back. Syria had trusted him with everything, and he wasn't going to let her down. As the ship lifted off the ground, Alex looked out the window at the stars. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. The story of Syria's people and the promise between humans and aliens wasn't over. It had only just begun. And with that, a new chapter in the galaxy's history was about to unfold.